The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar. This is Heather Creven from Wastecap Nebraska, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This is our 7th webinar in the Business and Community Roadmap series to Zero Waste. Wastecap Nebraska has 4 webinars related to businesses and 4 webinars related to communities in 2016. United States Zero Waste Business Council will be presenting for the business webinars and EcoCycle for the community webinars. For a complete listing of remaining topics, visit our website at www.wastecapne.org and look under the events section on our homepage. All of these webinars are funded by a grant from the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. For those of you who may not be familiar with Wastecap Nebraska, we are a statewide, member-based nonprofit that works with community and business leaders to build zero-waste communities. Our mission is to eliminate waste in Nebraska through innovation, education, and policy change. This webinar will focus on implementing reduce and reuse. While recycling is an important part of the journey to zero waste at any business, businesses that have reduced wasteful processes and implemented reuse systems before focusing on recycling have realized the most savings. This webinar demonstrates how to save money, reduce your environmental footprint, and make the best use of available tools and resources on all those important R's, reduce and reuse. Mary Ellen ATN has been working in sustainable materials management for 2 decades, specializing in reuse. Mary Ellen manages waste reduction and diversion programming at the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio in Columbus, Ohio. In her spare time, she's the executive producer of Reuse Connects, the International Reuse Conference and Expo, and prior to Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, she ran the Reuse Institute, Reuse Alliance, and the Reuse New York City, and worked at a London Community Resource Network, New York Waste Match, Materials for the Arts. Mary Ellen is on the board of directors of the Association of Ohio Recyclers, National Recycling Coalition, Reuse Institute, and Scrap USA. Stephanie Barger is the founder and executive director of U.S. Zero Waste Business Council, formed in January of 2012 to meet the growing needs for educational resources, peer-to-peer networking, and third-party certification for businesses across the nation. Stephanie has more than 25 years of experience in environmental stewardship, employee training, management consulting, and business relationship development. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration from San Diego State University. During this webinar, please type your questions into the chat box as they come to your mind, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. A recording of this presentation will be available afterwards on our website in the archives at www.wastecapne.org. Thank you again for attending this webinar, and as I turn the presentation over to Mary Ellen, there will be a slight delay before she gets started.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to Wastecap Nebraska for inviting me to be here. I'm pleased to provide you with an overview of reuse and its triple bottom line benefits. In today's lesson, we'll start by covering the definitions and drivers that relate to reduce and reuse. Then I'll provide an overview of the reuse industry and cover the concepts of triple bottom line benefits. Then we'll talk about how to green your procurement and how to track the impacts related to these activities. Then I'll finish up with a set of resources to help you learn more. In part 2, Stephanie will provide you with examples of zero waste businesses and how they've employed a range of reduction and reuse strategies to help their bottom line. Next. We're going to start off by talking about reduce, which is also known as source reduction or waste prevention, and it is any change in the design or manufacture, purchase, and or use of products or materials, including packaging, to reduce their amount or toxicity before they are discarded and become solid waste. Next. Reuse, on the other hand, is extending the life of an item by using it more than once for the same or new function. By taking useful materials and products and exchanging them without reprocessing them or recycling or downcycling, as it were, reuse retains the embedded energy and natural resources used in the product's manufacturing process. Next. We're going to do a few clarifications here. Reuse always reduces waste, but reduce doesn't always include reuse. So if, for example, you have a manufacturer that is retooling their production line in order to reduce byproducts before they become waste, that's a source reduction activity, and it does not entail reuse. On the other side, if a manufacturer would sell or donate those byproducts through a reuse outlet, it becomes a reuse activity, and waste reduction is the outcome. Next. Reduce and reuse are also not recycling. So recycling or downcycling is a process of breaking down a used item into the raw materials or the components which are then used to make new items. For example, if you have wood, surplus wood, and reuse would take that surplus wood and turn it into flooring or furniture or something else, whereas recycling would take the same wood and turn it into sawdust and mulch. So you could see that's really downcycling the product. Next. Here are a few ways you can kind of really highlight the differences between reduce and reuse. And some of these strategies can be used at work, at home, at school, wherever. But just to give you an example, so if you were talking about shipping or logistics and you refuse to work with a vendor that provided non-recyclable packaging, that would be a reduce strategy. If you require a vendor to provide reusable pallets, take them back, refurbish them, and supply you with new reusables, that would be a reuse strategy. If you're in the office and you go paperless or perhaps offer duplex printing as a default, that would be a reduce strategy. If you offer an internal or perhaps an external materials exchange where you have surplus goods that you're putting back into the stream, the resource stream, that would be a reuse strategy. And lastly, if you're in your home kitchen or your office cafeteria, whatever the case may be, if you reduce portion size in order to reduce waste, that's a reduction strategy. If you offer reusable serviceware instead of single use, or you allow for the donation of excess food, that would be a reuse strategy. That's just a little bit to give you an idea. Next. Now we're going to talk about some of the drivers behind waste reduction and reuse. Next slide. Global climate change. So now that we are truly a global economy, global climate change is a reality that we need to deal with. Whether it's a drought on one side of the world or a flood on the other, the way you live your life or run your business can be affected by a climate change-related situation thousands of miles away. Next. Resource consumption. So the consumption of our resources, not just energy, material goods as well, is steadily on the rise. We have a limited amount of non-renewable resources, and we really need to ensure that we are good stewards of these materials. Next slide. MSW, or municipal solid waste. The generation of MSW is on the rise, and it continues to increase. We continue to spend more time, money, effort, and resources in order to deal with the ever-increasing amounts of trash we create. Next. Although unemployment is leveling off, underemployment continues to be a factor in our global economy, and this is one of the drivers of the green economy, including waste reduction and reuse. Next slide. The final and negative driver, as it were, is also one of the biggest, and that is lack of awareness. So we continue to see people disposing of materials in unfriendly ways, and we need to address it. Next slide. Now for the good news. Let's discuss some of the drivers that are helping make seismic shifts in how we look at the world and how we live our lives and do business. Next. System thinking research is certainly a major driver. Prior reviews of the impacts of waste showed it generating about 13% of U.S. GHG, greenhouse gases, but a 2009 report from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency shows that about 42% of GHG emissions were associated with the production, processing, transport, and disposal of both the food we eat and the goods we use. So this includes extraction of materials and food, production and transport of goods, provision of services, etc. While it may seem like bad news, it really has elevated the importance of waste management in the GHG conversation. Next slide. Sustainable materials management, or SMM, it doesn't just mean trying to make better decisions about the end of a product's life cycle through reuse or recycling, composting, energy recovery, or landfilling. But it also refers to the use and reuse of materials in the most productive and sustainable way across their entire cycle. Highest and best use is a concept we use here. So SMM conserves resources, reduces waste, slows climate change, and minimizes the impacts of the materials we use. Next slide. Zero waste systems, this of course is something Stephanie will delve deeper into, and I know this whole webinar is looking at this issue on a broader scale. But rather than looking at our systems as one-way or linear, we're looking to redesign them to be cyclical as in nature, where there's no such thing as waste and materials are kept in the production cycle. Zero waste is really, truly emerging as a paradigm shift, a new comprehensive system that addresses our resource use from product design through disposal, and hopefully use and reuse and recycling. Next slide. Just a few other drivers that we're talking about. Design for the environment. So we need to address waste before it happens. So that's the reduce side of things. And we can do this in the design phase. So design for the environment ensures products and packaging are designed and manufactured with the use of non-toxic materials and are designed for reuse, recycling, or composting. The next one, empower green consumers. As we all know, and we are probably some of them, the number and buying power of green consumers continues to be a rise, and it's affecting this industry. Investments in recovery. So we're seeing municipal investments in reuse and recycling and infrastructure, not only in the U.S., but internationally, and oftentimes are coupled with a divestment in disposal infrastructure, which is key. EPR, or Extended Producer Responsibility, puts a legal, financial, and environmental responsibility for materials entering the waste stream upon the manufacturer rather than the consumer, government, or municipal entity at the end of life cycle. So that's an important shift. Sometimes EPR can be very beneficial to reuse and recycling. Sometimes it's more problematic to reuse, so that's something we have to be careful with. Make sure that we are still looking at highest best use even with EPR framework. Next. Next, we're going to give you an overview of the reuse industry. It is a multifaceted industry, and it incorporates lots of different subsectors, and we'll take you through some of those and give you a better idea of what we're looking at. Next slide. First, we'll talk about conventional reuse, and that's as is, using materials basically for the purpose they were manufactured. And probably the most common forms of conventional reuse is thrift shops. There's over 30,000 thrift shops in the U.S., according to the National Association of Thrift and Resale. And so you have your kind of obvious people, Goodwill and Salvation Army on the nonprofit side. There's also a host of different players on the for-profit side, including Play It Again Sports, Plato's Closet, Music Around, Once Upon a Child, and as well as independent stores. Next. Within the conventional reuse subsector, there's also building materials reuse centers. So Habitat Restore would be the common brand name in that field. There's also many independent building materials reuse centers as well. And so they take in used surplus building materials, as the name belies, and either offers them at a discounted rate and occasionally provides them free of charge. There's also furniture banks. They collect household goods, whether it's somebody coming out of a domestic violence situation or perhaps a refugee situation, where they're able to provide furniture for their home. Next slide. And there's also resale websites. So there's the eBay, Amazon, used marketplaces, Craigslist. There's also nonprofit opportunities as well, reuse marketplace. You could stay on that slide, that's fine. Conventional reuse, also last chance reuse sheds. Many municipalities around the country have some sort of material reuse facility, whether it's open air out in the areas that can do that. They have the weather. And there's plenty of other ones that are all year round. Next slide. Then there's food rescue organizations and food pantries. You may have a food bank with a network of food pantries, local food pantries, and they provide surplus and edible food to people in need. They don't often associate with reuse, but it is, again, highest and best use. If you're familiar with the EPA food recovery hierarchy, we're looking to feed people first, then feed animals, then feed industrial processes, and then feed the earth through composting. So reuse is a conventional reuse of that material. Next slide. And the last one within conventional reuse is those kind of low-flung heroes of reuse, the flea markets, yard sales, swap events. It's more of an informal subsector of the market, but it's also a very large portion of the market. And so these opportunities can't be overlooked. Next slide. Then we're going to talk about creative reuse, and this is one of my favorites within the reuse industry. And there's over 80 creative reuse centers here in the U.S., and those are generally nonprofit, but there are some for-profit as well that take in either industrial byproducts or materials from residents, and they make them available either retail, 70 to 80% off retail, or they're in some instances they provide it free to arts organizations, teachers, and so forth. Likewise, you have thousands or hundreds of thousands of upcycling designers that are making everything from jewelry to furniture and everything in between. So that's really when you're taking something that was manufactured for one thing and creating a new purpose for it. Next slide. Reclamation and salvage, that's where we take deconstructed structures and we transform them back into raw building materials, perhaps not for the same use. Here's one example, a bridge that was deconstructed and the timber was used in framing of a home. So sometimes it cannot necessarily take the same load that it was intended for after many years' use. So once you remill it, you can use it for a lower structure. Next slide. Adaptive reuse, that's where you take a building or a whole city block and you transform it into residential commercial properties. The first example on the left is the Avalon Danvers Apartments, where a defunct hospital was transformed into luxury condos. And on the right is the Novus Engineering facility, where a historic mill in the Northeast was transformed into offices of an engineering firm. Next slide. Then we'll talk about refillables and reusables, and this can happen either on the consumer side. Everybody has their ubiquitous canteen, water canteen. We want to see you using those. Refillable pens, you name it, on the consumer side. And then on the commercial, there's also commercial applications for durable and reusable products. And, you know, I had mentioned reusable pallets, whether they be plastic, like the ones you can see here, or reusable steel. You know, you name it, depends on the application and what it's needed for. And then also in service industry, restaurants that choose to use durable, reusable goods instead of disposable. Next slide. The sharing economy is also a part of the reuse umbrella, and that's really about intense use or reuse of products. And so for a good or product that you're only going to use on occasion, a specialty piece of tools or equipment that you can just rent rather than purchasing, and it could also go on the consumer side to bicycles. There's bicycle links everywhere popping up, so that the ability to share these products rather than everybody owning them. Next slide. The hot sector within the reuse industry is repair, for sure, both on the professional and self-repair options. iFixit.com is a fantastic resource for not only residents and consumers, but I bet there's many people that are creating businesses out of this. And it's an online forum where you can get tips and guides on to repair most anything. So from your cell phone to your jeans, zipper, you name it. So they have all these fantastic resource guides that you should check out. There's also an international effort called Repair Cafes, where they're bringing together people to not only just fix their goods, but show people, and they have mentors at these events and sites to actually show people how to fix their own goods and really take ownership of their products. And then, of course, there's professional, tried and true professional repair people that are able to fix your appliances and your cars and you name it. So that's a very large part of the sector. Next slide. And the last section within the industry is refurbish and remanufacturing. And generally speaking, refurbishing is low tech and remanufacturing is high tech. They are different. Sometimes they're used synonymously, but they are not. So the example on the left, so cubicles, if you're refurbishing, maybe you're cleaning, repainting the edges and resurfacing with new fabric, perhaps. Whereas when you're remanufacturing a toner cartridge, you're taking it apart completely, retesting all the components, potentially replacing them. So it's really bringing it back to the manufactured standard. Next slide. Now that we know more about the industry and all its different facets, we're going to talk about the triple bottom line benefits of reuse. Next slide. The other common name for triple bottom line is people, planet, profit, and we'll talk more about that, but it's really that bringing them all together and merging them to offer more to consumers and businesses. Next slide. So reduce and reuse is socially responsible. It provides low-cost, high-quality materials to individuals and organizations with limited means. It also provides meaningful living wage employment to those working in the industry. Next slide. Reduce and reuse is also environmentally friendly. It provides consumers who want options for environmentally preferable purchasing. It diverts valuable resources from the landfill. It also promotes resource conservation. And by reusing, you reduce the need in energy and raw materials, thereby mitigating GHG. It also reduces plastic pollution through the elimination of single-use materials. Next slide. Reduce and reuse can also be economically beneficial. So it can provide cost savings to donors. That could be avoided disposal cost or perhaps reduced disposal cost, avoided and or reduced purchase costs, and where applicable, it can provide tax benefits. It also provides cost savings to the recipient of goods through reduced or perhaps avoided purchase costs in some instances. It also can generate revenues for both individuals, entrepreneurs, or nonprofits or businesses working in the field. And once again, it also creates green-collar jobs. Next slide. In fact, I like to say that reuse is the original green-collar job. So this is a fantastic stat from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance based on an EPA study that found if you take 10,000 tons of material and you incinerate it, you create 1 job. If you landfill it, you create about 6. If you recycle, you create 36. And if you reuse that same materials, you can create anywhere from 28 to 296. And now that big shift between 28 and 296 really depends on the industry in which it's reused. So electronics, for example, electronic reuse is more labor intensive than perhaps textile reuse. Next slide. To delve a little deeper into this economic impact of reuse, I always refer back to a fantastic study by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that looked at the economics of the reuse industry in Minnesota. And they found that reuse directly employs about 46,000 people in the state and also creates 4.6 jobs in supporting sectors. It generated about $4 billion in gross sales annually, and most companies are locally owned and operated, and thereby increases capital retention. Next slide. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about greener procurement. Next slide. And reduce and reuse is, I mentioned environmentally preferable purchasing before, but it's not just about outputs. It's not just about the end of life, and you don't really, you're not engaging in this unless you're using it as part of your procurement strategy. And so it could be in terms of logistics solutions. We've mentioned durable and reusable pallets instead of using perhaps cardboard boxes or single-use pallets. In terms of the furniture, like we showed earlier in the refurbished workstations, you can save 50 to 75% on getting your office furniture used. Likewise, in terms of your office supplies, are you looking at refillable pens and pencils or remanufactured toner cartridges? You really have to do it both ways. And then again, in the kitchen or cafeteria, looking to use that to displace the single use with reusable serviceware or perhaps reusable to-go boxes. There's many universities and communities that are starting to go that way, as well as diverting food waste through, as I mentioned, food recovery organizations. You may even be able to offer some sort of swap or repair within your community or your company, whether it's an online exchange of goods or perhaps hosting repair cafes. And just to give you one example here, of a company that used logistics, Ingersoll Rand, which is a multinational firm, used the reusable packaging initiative where they switched from disposable packaging, cardboard boxes, and wooden pallets to returnable bins, totes, and boxes. And by doing this one single reuse strategy in just one of their facilities, it saves them over $2 million annually. So you can see there really can be great benefits, especially on the economic side. Next slide. Next, we're going to talk about how perhaps you can track your impacts. I worked with the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council to help provide some toolkits and resources in their certification program, and these are just a few of the ways that we're looking to assess the situation. Next slide. First and foremost, you have to determine your waste stream, your baseline. Whenever you're doing any waste-based program, you really need to figure out what is the materials in your stream, what are the byproducts, do you have a manufacturing process or something to that ilk, and you have byproducts. What are you using in terms of your transport packaging, your general packaging waste coming out of office supplies, perhaps your paper, serviceware, food, even your bathroom products. You really have to look in all the areas of your home or business to see what the baseline is. Next slide. Then you have to figure out how to measure diversion. So some of the most common metrics that we use to talk about waste reduction and reuse is the number of tons or pounds diverted from the landfill. But we also really want to look at the economic side of things, and we talk about the dollars avoided, both disposal costs, purchase costs, the value of materials donated if you do donate it, as well as the revenues generated if you do sell used and or upcycled goods. We also like to look at the social side of things and the number of jobs created or retained, as well as the number of families, individuals, or organizations assisted through these reuse activities. Next slide. Okay, next we'll talk about a few resources that are available to you. Next slide. Some of the low-cost opportunities in the field beyond U.S. Zero Waste Business Council, which has tremendous resources and which Stephanie will talk more about. There's the Manufacturer Extension Partnership. So if you run a manufacturing organization, they can provide assistance in terms of source reduction and reuse. There's a Pollution Prevention Network, mostly in terms of informational services, but they have a host of fantastic resources. And I'll do a little plug. As Heather mentioned, I'm the creator and producer of Reuse Connects, and it's an International Reuse Conference and Expo, and it runs every other year. This year we're going to be in Boston in October, and it's a fantastic training event that if you're really interested in diving deeper, I would suggest. Next slide. Oh, okay. Free resources. The Reuse Institute hosts online crowdsourced reuse library where we have reports, articles, industry research, and some samples of some operational documents. And we also have the Reuse Primer and the Reuse Movement Toolkit on there as well. So please do feel free to reach out. I'll send you the web links later. You know, and as well as if you have resources that you'd like to share about, you know, that deal with this issue, please do add them to the library. Next slide. This is some of the links associated with my part of the webinar. So the EPA Life Cycle Study, the Minnesota Pollution Control, the library, MEP, and P2 networks. Next slide. Okay, that's it for me, and I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
So much. Terrific. Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. We appreciate all that great information, and Mary Ellen is a huge resource, so hopefully you will utilize all that she has to offer. So I want to go over quickly some of the companies and what they are doing to reduce and reuse. So first of all, I want to highlight Disney, and they have their Circle D stables on site. And this houses all their horses and pigs and goats and their petting zoo. And one of the things that they've done is really look at outside and inside Disney, what they can utilize for enjoyment for the animals. So one thing that they found was street cleaners, the brushes on street cleaners make great scratching for the cows and the horses to utilize. And there's other things like used balls and stuff that the animals can push around and play with and create enjoyment. So really thinking outside of the box and working with your community and the zoos and everything, and something that you might not find useful, they might find useful. The other thing is the Disney train. It actually runs off of all the oils that they get from their fryers and everything like that. And so once again, thinking outside of solid waste and looking at your oils and greases and even other liquids that can be reused. And then one thing that's really critical is reusable dishware. Mary Ellen spoke about that, but a lot is in the misperceptions of what reusable dishware, the benefits from it. Here in the state of California, we of course are experiencing a 5-year drought. So a lot of what people think is like, oh, I'm going to use so much more water when I use reusable dishware. That's actually false, and Disney has actually done a study, and this was internally so that they could show all their cast members and all their staff that it's more important and more environmentally friendly to use reusable dishware. And part of that is because the large amount of water that is used upstream in either cutting down trees, extracting oil, and in that manufacturing. Also, most dishwashers, it costs you less than 34 cents to run a dishwasher and wash the dishes. Another thing is the break-even time for reusable dishware. We've done a study, and so has Disney, and it is less than 30 days to recover your cost of buying reusable dishware. And that it doesn't include all the staff time that it takes in disposables. In disposables, you utilize a lot of staff time in ordering and paying the invoices and following up on orders and the delivery of the orders, stocking of the disposable dishware, and then disposing of it. And that takes a lot of employee time. So actually reusable dishware saves you staff time. The other one I want to highlight is Whole Foods Market. Their prepared foods comes directly from the grocery store. So when you're buying their pizzas and salads and everything, that most of that is coming from their store directly. So in the mornings, they go around to all their different departments, the dairy, the fish, the meat, the vegetables, and they pull from it things that are getting ready to expire or go bad. So they pull them a day before they would, and then they use them in their prepared foods. The other thing is donations to people, and we know we've mentioned this before, but one key is if you have a lot of food to donate on a daily basis is not to work with one nonprofit, but to actually have several churches, women abuse homes, and nonprofits that are coming on different days. So that way, if something happens and one nonprofit can't come, you're not going to have to throw away that food. There's another nonprofit you can call, or somebody is coming later. And I really encourage you to search around your local community and really get to know the needs, because one food bank might be very particular on what they're going to pick up and not pick up, where another one, like we work with the Salvation Army here in SOS, and they will basically take everything. In fact, when I go to a luncheon, everybody knows that I'm going to take the food when I leave, and I drive it directly over to SOS. Their staff takes it out of the car and puts it in their refrigerators. So really, work with your local community and find the best fit, and it might be several different fits. The other one that people forget about is donations to animals. In Arizona, the Whole Food Market actually donates all their greens to a reptile rescue. We work with another one, the Wildlife Waste Station here in California, and their food bill is $3,000 a month. So anything and everything that they can get donated really helps that nonprofit. And so once again, your bananas and apples that you might not want to give to people, the animals don't care. And there's a great website called wastenotoc.org, and they're actually spreading the word nationally. But if you're concerned about the laws and regulations in donating food, Waste Not OC has all the information there, the Good Samaritan Law, and it was actually developed by the Orange County Health Department. So therefore, it's coming from that situation. Then with reduce and reuse, this is really where the big money is, and Mary Ellen highlighted that with Ingersoll. So recycling is great, but we want to go beyond recycling to that reduce and reuse, rethink and redesign. And this is a graphic by Toyota of their evolution of using returnables. They were doing a great job recycling cardboard, but they went to returnable, reusable shipping containers. And they saved over $1 billion in packaging costs. So this is big money. And they also highlighted the number of trees they saved and other environmental and community factors. So that initial investment pays itself off over and over again. And then once again, I want to highlight that it is easier for your employees, and it saves tremendous amount of time using reusables. Here's another example of reusable packaging and going back and working with your vendor. So Ricoh Electronics, they were getting all their chemicals in small paint cans, and this was taking a lot of time to open them up and pour them in. They went back and worked with their vendor to use a reusable drum. What's more important is they were able to eliminate their hazardous waste bill, because they were having to throw all these chemical cans into a hazardous waste bin. since now they're returning the drums to the vendor, they went and were able to eliminate their hazardous waste delivery service. So it's so important to work with your vendor. We had a grocery store, this isn't so much reuse, but recycling and redesign, where they are recycling their big buckets, but the buckets have a metal handle and the bucket is plastic. Those are both recyclable, but they're very hard to handle. They went back to their bucket vendor and asked them to redesign, and the initial reaction was, no, there's no way we can do it. This large grocery store said, well, we'll go to another vendor. Within 30 days, their original vendor redesigned the bucket. So don't underestimate your purchasing power. And if you're having a problem material or looking and you need more leverage, try and partner with other organizations and businesses that are using that material where you can go back. And our governments are some of our largest employers and largest purchasers, so really partner with them and see if you can help reduce and reuse. Here's another example, and that's why it's important to train all your employees in zero waste. So this came from the employees, and they were getting all kinds of cardboard boxes in, and we're recycling them. But then one of their employees realized that the boxes that they were taking in were the same as the boxes that they were purchasing to put their products in and ship out. So they identified this in similar size and everything like that, and they were able to reuse the boxes coming in from their vendor. And Bronco Wines, actually, they went and worked with their vendors on their wine bottles. So when the bottles come in, they're actually packaged in the packaging that will go out to the grocery store. So it comes in, they take them out of that package, put the wine in it, and then put it back in that package, and it's not the double, triple packaging. So really looking at those opportunities and working downstream and upstream. And then for my last example, this is really, it's simple, but it's very important. And whenever you're doing anything, it's just look at and see how you can reduce, reduce, reduce. And things as simple as all those straws and napkins and little ketchup containers. Do we really need straws? Can you use reusable napkins? You can purchase reusable napkins at discounted like Ross's and places like that for, 2 cents or 5 cents a napkin. You can go to Goodwill and get them. Actually, I was up in Eugene, Oregon, and they worked with a big, huge linen company that supplied to large hotels. And if there was one thing wrong with a tablecloth or a napkin, they were throwing it away. So the city of Eugene, in their reuse efforts, worked with this linen company, and we're having all of them donated. And then they repaired the napkins and the tablecloths, working with local community, and then they gave the napkins and the tablecloths out to the local communities, nonprofits, to use in their events. So, and then honestly, the linen company caught on and said, oh, why aren't we repairing these instead of just throwing them away? So that's a win-win for everybody. And then the other thing is just creating a zero waste zone and really getting people to think outside the box. So you might not be able to get your whole company to go zero waste, but creating a zero waste zone or a reusable zone. Really good for office supplies. If you can set up an area or a cupboard or a storage room for reusable office supplies, and what we suggest is once a month you have your employees clean out their desks. I'm a pen hogger, so I'm the one with 20, 30 pens. So I need to clean them out and put them back so everybody else can use them. At one of our large companies, at their receptionist, he would send out an email to everybody asking them to return his pens back to the reception area. So you can have a lot of fun with this and encourage it. And the other thing I would say is our nonprofits, as Mary Ellen suggested, are in such need. One of my companies had 36 boxes of binders, and they didn't know what to do with them. I sent out an email, and they were gone in 2 days. The schools and nonprofits came and picked them up. And then just thinking old school. what did we do before we had all these disposable plastics and disposable paper? Going back to, glass reusable Tupperware, bringing your own fork and knife, there's all kinds of things we can do, reusable bags, to just eliminate in the beginning. And then clean it with green. Why do I have this here under reduce and reuse? Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they go and replace their cleaners with green cleaners, they think they have to replace every single cleaner. Usually you can buy one green cleaner and then use baking soda, vinegar, even hydrogen peroxide to clean with green. And then, of course, switching to reusable towels instead of paper towels is key. And there's lots of companies that will wash. If you're in a large company that uses lots of towels, they'll come and pick them up and wash them. And once again, you'll save money over buying all of those disposables. And then sodas, of course, switching back to glass and aluminum off of plastic. But more importantly, even going where you have your own dispenser so people can use their reusable cups. And then just pride of ownership and remembering what we need to do to make our companies look good and not to create all this trash. Because that's a big thing with all these disposables, is they create tons of litter, and you as a company are having to pick it up, or your community is having to pick it up. So by switching to reusables, we won't have all these plastic bags and styrofoam and everything going into our oceans and beaches and waterways. So really looking at that, and then, going out and sweeping and cleaning, and you'll see all the disposables and things that you need to switch to reusables. So we have many more examples, and I just want to really emphasize that it's all about the money. If you're talking with your company and your leadership, reusables and reducing create more income. And it makes your company real lean and mean, and it really helps your employees save time so they can focus, instead of unpackaging materials, they can focus on creating materials that you're sending out. So thank you again. We are here to answer any questions that you have and really appreciate your time.
Thank you to Stephanie and Mary Ellen for the great presentations and all the information. I do have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is, do you have any tips on coming up with a process for moving items out to community partners without being too labor intensive?
Sure, Heather, I'll take that one, Mary Ellen. Well, first I would say you need to scope out your resources. Who are those community partners? What do they take? When and how? As Stephanie mentioned, some are more stringent with their donation policies, others aren't. Really think outside the box. Now, doing a scoping exercise may seem like it's a little time intensive upfront, but it really will help create institutional knowledge that you could share internally within your organization or perhaps externally. And to that point, externally, work with other businesses in your communities, perhaps create a network or a committee council that helps to connect these reuse resources, community partners, with your businesses and other like businesses. And, maybe you could do that with a municipality, for example, the City of Austin, City of Portland, and the City of New York. They all have some sort of formal or informal reuse network that helps kind of work with businesses and the community to help place materials. You could also do something kind of informal, perhaps. Stephanie just mentioned, put out an email. She had, crates of binders, and she found a home for them. Perhaps there's green listservs in your community that you could post material offerings. There's also online materials exchange, Craigslist, you name it, get out there, get the materials. Then there's also many apps and resources for both for consumers and for commercial materials exchanges as well. One example is an app called Spoiler Alert that is looking to help find homes for perishable food. So, when you have something surplus, you can get it on there. So, you know, kind of think outside the box in terms of that. You may also want to, if your company hosts an Earth Day event, you know, invite the local reuse companies to get out there and join you. It's kind of, reuse is often overlooked in terms of Earth Day events and the waste stream. It generally talks more in terms of conservation efforts and whatnot. So really get out there and invite them to come into your space, and you can learn more about them and what they offer. So really, you know, just thinking outside the box and getting materials into the resource stream and out of the waste stream. That would be my suggestion.
Our next question is, what suggestions do you have on how to start efforts in a business?
Great, thank you, Heather, and I'll answer that one. So I think the first thing, as Mary Ellen said, is you have to know your trash, and you have to know what you're throwing in the garbage and even in the recycling, because there's a lot of answers in those bins. And that's why we encourage people to sort. So even with your trash, you know, how many plastic stirrers do you have? How many, you know, little creamers do you have? Really sorting that out. How many in your recycling bin? How many plastic water bottles do you have? How many pieces of paper do you have? And then putting on a different mindset and different eyeglasses and saying, number one, how can I reduce that? Plastic stirrers or even wooden stirrers, you just use a spoon and those are easy to watch. You know, plastic water bottles, you know, the amount that companies spend on buying water bottles, they can put in a water filtration system and provide reusable water bottles for their employees and even their customers. So really you have to know what you're using first. And then, of course, an easier way is to go and look at what you're purchasing. And then the other thing is employee engagement. And you can have a lot of fun with this, and you know, you might not want to bring the stinky items from the trash, but before they're actually going into the trash and recycling bin, collect them, or just have employees bring a hard to recycle item or an item they're concerned about, and then having fun with it. This is a great team building. Most companies allow time and money for team building activities, and this can be a win-win where you can get the creativity and the understanding from your employees and also utilize those team building revenues. One of our clients at their company picnic, they took all their recycling and they encouraged the families to build kites out of them. And they actually built kites that flew, and they took them home and used them. So once again, thinking outside the box. And then really, you know, sharing with other companies what your challenges are. This can be on a conference call or, you know, at a chamber meeting or a different type of networking meeting, and just spark that conversation. And this is something that happened at one of our partner meetings where an almond grower wanted to actually burn his almond hulls because it was easier for him to get rid of than sending them to the landfill. Well, there was a paint company right next to him, and the paint company says, I need your almond hulls. And so that's that great exchange by bringing people together and changing the conversation to how can we help each other and what resources can we share.
Great, and I would like to, again, thank Stephanie and both Mary Ellen for all of the information and for their time to make this webinar available and presented. And then again, for all of you who are attending, this webinar will be available on our website at www.wastecapne.org. Thank you.